Daniel Coleman had exactly one pair of good boots, and both of them were tired. The soles were worn thin from years of standing on concrete, and there was a crack near the left heel that let cold air in every winter. He kept meaning to replace them. He kept not doing it. There was always something more important. A school fee, a grocery bill, a part he had to order for someone's car before he could even think about ordering something for himself. He ran a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, the kind of place most people only found because someone else told them about it. The sign outside said Webb and Daughter Auto. In letters he had painted himself one Sunday afternoon, with his daughter sitting on an overturned bucket beside him, handing him brushes and getting more paint on her fingers than on the wood. She had been 4 then. She was 7 now, and the sign had faded a little, but the name never changed. He liked people to know, the second they pulled into the lot, that this wasn't just a business, it was a family. His daughter's name was Lily. She had her mother's eyes and Daniel's stubbornness, and most afternoons after school she did her homework on a stack of old seat cushions in the back office, because there was nowhere else for her to be. Daniel didn't have family nearby. He didn't have the money for a babysitter, not on top of everything else, and the truth was, he liked having her close. It made the long days feel less long. It made the shop feel less like a place he was trapped in, and more like a place they were building together. Being a single father hadn't been part of the plan. Nothing about his life had gone according to any plan, if he was honest. His wife had left 3 years earlier, not in some dramatic, door-slamming way, but slowly, the way water leaves a bucket with a hole in it, a little at a time, until one day you look and there's nothing left. She said she needed a different life. Daniel understood that better than he wanted to admit. Some nights, staring at the ceiling with grease still under his fingernails and a stack of bills on the kitchen table that never seemed to get smaller. But he had a daughter, and daughters don't get to wait around for their fathers to figure out a different life. They need the one you're already living to work. So he made it work, the way people do when there's no other option. He fixed cars from 6 in the morning until the sun went down, and sometimes later, if a customer needed their car back before work the next day. He learned to cook simple things that Lily liked. He learned to braid hair from a video he watched at midnight after she fell asleep, so that in the morning he wouldn't be fumbling with her hair while she was already late for school. He learned to say yes to every job that came through the door, no matter how small, no matter how far below what it was worth, because a small job paid for was better than a big job that never came. That was the world Daniel lived in on the day a black car pulled into his lot. The kind of car that didn't belong in that part of town, gleaming and silent. The kind of car whose owner never had to think about a crack in her boots. The woman who got out was maybe 40, dressed like she had somewhere more important to be, which she probably did. She wore sunglasses even though the morning wasn't especially bright, and she walked into the shop like she already knew she wasn't going to enjoy the visit. "I was told you could look at my brakes," she said. Not a greeting. Just information, handed over like a task she wanted finished. "Sure thing," Daniel said, wiping his hands on a rag that had given up being clean sometime the previous year. "Pull it into the bay, I'll take a look." It didn't take him long to see the problem. Worn brake pads, a rotor that had seen better days. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous yet, but nothing that should wait much longer either. He wrote up the estimate the way he always did. Honest, itemized, nothing hidden. $199. Parts and labor. Fair, even generous for the work involved. The woman looked at the number like it had personally offended her. $200 for brake pads, she said. $199. And it's not just pads. The rotor needs resurfacing too. Otherwise the new pads will wear down twice as fast, and you'll be back here in a month. I didn't ask for a lecture. I asked why it cost this much. Daniel had given this explanation more times than he could count, to more people than he could count, and it never got easier to hear someone question the value of his work, like it was something he'd made up to trick them. "Parts, labor, my time," he said, keeping his voice level. "It's fair pricing. You can check around town if you want, but I think you'll find it's about the same anywhere, if not more. I'm not paying that. Ma'am, I've already done the work. It's finished. The car's ready." "Then send me an invoice," she said, already turning toward the door. "Someone will look at it." Daniel had heard that line before too, from other people who thought a small business was something you could brush off the way you'd brush lint from a jacket. He knew, the moment she said it, that no one was going to look at anything, that the invoice would sit in some inbox until it quietly disappeared, the way unpaid invoices always did when the person who owed the money simply didn't think it mattered. He wanted to argue. He wanted to stand in the doorway and tell her that $199 might be nothing to her, might be the cost of a dinner she wouldn't remember by next week, but that it was groceries for 2 weeks in his house. It was the difference between paying the electric bill on time or paying it late with a fee attached. It was new shoes for his daughter before the school year started, shoes she needed because her feet, like everything about her, kept growing whether he was ready for it or not. But he didn't say any of that. He had learned a long time ago that arguing with people like her rarely changed anything, and it cost him energy he didn't have to spare. So he just watched her get into her car and drive away, the brakes he'd just fixed working perfectly, smoothly, silently, the way good work always does, invisible, unless you're the one who did it, and unpaid for it. That night, after he'd closed the shop and carried a sleeping Lily to the car, after he'd gotten her into bed and sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, he thought about the woman in the sunglasses. Not with anger exactly. More like a tiredness that had settled somewhere deep in his chest, the kind that comes from being underestimated so many times that you start to wonder if the world will ever see you the way you actually are. He didn't know her name. He wouldn't learn it until later. He didn't know, sitting there with his cold coffee and his cracked boots and his daughter asleep down the hall, that the woman who'd just cost him $199 was about to change his life completely, just not in the way anyone would have guessed. Her name was Claire Whitfield, and if you had asked her why she refused to pay a small mechanic shop that morning, she probably couldn't have given you a real answer. It wasn't about the money. Claire had more money than she knew what to do with. The number on that invoice meant nothing to her bank account. It barely registered as a rounding error in a life built on much bigger numbers. But there was something about the way Daniel had looked at her, not with anger, not with the fake politeness people usually offered her once they learned who her father was, but with a kind of plain, unimpressed honesty that had gotten under her skin. He hadn't treated her like she was important. He'd treated her like a customer who owed him money for work he'd done, which of course was exactly what she was. But Claire wasn't used to being just anything. She was used to being Claire Whitfield, daughter of Walter Whitfield, the man whose name sat in gold letters on top of a building downtown, the man everyone in the city seemed to know, admire, and compare her to. Claire ran a division of her father's company, a logistics and freight business with hundreds of employees and a fleet of trucks that crisscrossed 3 states. She had an office with a view, a title that sounded impressive on paper, and a reputation for being difficult that she'd built carefully, almost on purpose, because being difficult meant people took her seriously. In a world where every deal she closed was quietly credited to her father's name instead of her own, being difficult was the only tool she had that felt entirely hers. She told herself, driving away from that little shop with its faded hand-painted sign, that she hadn't done anything wrong. The mechanic could send his invoice. Someone in accounting would deal with it eventually. Or they wouldn't, and either way it was a small matter that didn't deserve another thought. She thought about it anyway, all day, which annoyed her more than the mechanic himself ever could have. Walter Whitfield was 74 years old, and he had built his company from a single truck he'd bought, with a loan he almost didn't get, back when he was 26, and had nothing but a strong back and a stubborn refusal to fail. He remembered what it felt like to need every dollar and have people treat that need like it was invisible. He remembered nights very much like the one Daniel Coleman was living right now, sitting at a kitchen table with numbers that didn't add up, wondering if the next month would be the one where everything finally fell apart. He found out about the incident at the garage almost by accident. An old friend mentioned it over a round of golf, in that offhand way people mention gossip they think is harmless. Heard your daughter had some trouble at a little repair shop out past the highway. Refused to pay the bill, apparently. Small stuff, don't worry about it. Walter did worry about it, though he didn't say so at the time. He thanked his friend for the update, finished his round, and drove home, turning the story over in his mind the whole way. He asked his driver, a quiet, steady man named Franklin, who had worked for the family for over a decade, if he knew anything about the shop. As it happened, Franklin did. His own car had needed work recently, and someone had recommended Webb and Daughter Auto, told him it was run by a good man who did honest work and didn't try to squeeze extra money out of customers the way some bigger shops did. Franklin had gone, and the work had been excellent, fairly priced, done fast. He's got a little girl, Franklin added, almost as an afterthought. She does her homework in the office while he works. Sweet kid, quiet. Walter didn't say much after that. But something had settled in him, heavy and certain, the way decisions sometimes do before you've even fully thought them through. He asked Franklin for the address. Daniel was under a car the next afternoon when the bell above the door rang, announcing a customer. He didn't rush. He never did. Not for anyone, because rushing on a car meant mistakes, and mistakes meant someone's brakes failing on a highway somewhere. He finished the section he was working on, wheeled himself out from underneath the vehicle, and stood up to greet whoever had walked in. It was an older man, silver-haired, dressed simply but well, the kind of well-dressed that didn't shout about itself. He had a stillness to him, the kind that comes from a lifetime of not needing to prove anything to anyone. "Are you Daniel Coleman?" the man asked. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "You did some brake work recently for a woman named Claire Whitfield." Daniel felt his stomach tighten, the way it always did when a name showed up looking for round two of an argument he'd already lost once. "I did," he said carefully. "She didn't pay for it, if that's what you're here about." "That's exactly what I'm here about." The old man's voice was calm, almost gentle. "How much was owed?" $199. "It's fine, though. These things happen. I sent an invoice. I wasn't going to chase her down over it." "You should have," the man said. "Every dollar of honest work deserves to be paid. Never let anyone tell you different, especially not because they think their name is bigger than yours." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He glanced past the man toward the office, where Lily was sitting on her cushions, pencil in hand, watching the stranger with the particular curiosity that only children seem to have. Unfiltered, direct, unbothered by the usual rules of politeness. "Who exactly are you?" Daniel finally asked. "My name is Walter Whitfield. Claire is my daughter." He let that sit for a moment, watching Daniel's face carefully. "I'm going to pay what she owes you, right now, and then I'd like to come back tomorrow and talk to you about something else, something bigger." Daniel almost laughed, not out of disrespect, but out of pure disbelief. He'd heard promises like that before, usually from people who didn't follow through, who said things sounded good in the moment, and then vanished the second they walked out the door. "You don't need to do that, sir. It was $200. I'll survive." "I know you will," Walter said. "That's not why I'm doing it." He took out a checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, the old-fashioned kind, the kind Daniel hadn't seen anyone use in years, and wrote a check right there on the counter, his handwriting slightly unsteady but deliberate, like every letter mattered to him. He tore it free and placed it face down on the counter, almost shyly, like a man not used to feeling embarrassed but feeling something close to it anyway. 24 hours, Walter said. "Don't close early tomorrow. I'll be back." And then he left, before Daniel could ask a single one of the dozen questions crowding his mind. Daniel flipped the check over. It was made out for $200 exactly, $1 over the amount owed. In the memo line, in that same slightly shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "Keep the change. Sorry." That evening, Daniel told Lily about the strange visit while they ate dinner at the kitchen table. Grilled cheese sandwiches, because it was Thursday, and Thursday was always grilled cheese, a tradition they'd built without ever really deciding to build it. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Lily asked, swinging her feet under her chair, because her legs were still too short to reach the floor. "I don't know, baby. Grown-ups say a lot of things. But he paid you already. That's not nothing." Daniel smiled at that, the way he often did when his daughter said something wiser than her years should have allowed. "No," he admitted, "that's not nothing." He didn't sleep well that night, not because he was worried exactly, but because hope is a strange and uncomfortable thing when you're not used to carrying it. He had learned, over the years, to keep his expectations small and manageable, the way you might keep a fire small in a house without a working chimney. Enough to stay warm, not so much that it burned the whole place down if it got out of control. But some tiny, stubborn part of him allowed himself to wonder, just a little, what something bigger might mean. Claire found out her father had gone to the garage the same way she found out most things about his life these days. Second-hand, through Franklin, delivered with the kind of gentle hesitation of a man who knew he was stepping into family business that wasn't really his to step into. "He went himself?" Claire asked, more surprised than she wanted to admit. "Why would he do that?" "I couldn't say, Miss Whitfield, but he asked me to have the car ready early tomorrow. Said he had a meeting." Claire sat in her office that evening, long after everyone else had gone home, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. She thought about the mechanic's face again, not angry, not even particularly upset, just tired, in a way that had clearly been building for a long time before she ever walked through his door. She thought about her father, who had told her 100 times growing up about the years when he had nothing, when a single unpaid bill could mean the difference between keeping his truck on the road or losing everything he'd worked for. She had never really connected those stories to her own life. They had always felt like something from a history book. True but distant, the way old photographs feel true but distant, showing you a world you can recognize but never quite touch. Now, for the first time, she wondered if she had just done to someone else exactly what people had once tried to do to her father. She didn't call the garage that night. She told herself it was because it was too late, because there was nothing useful to say yet, because tomorrow would be a better time. But if she was honest with herself, which she wasn't always eager to be, the real reason was simpler than that. She wasn't ready to hear what she might have to say if she did call. The next morning, Daniel kept the shop open past its usual hours, even though he hadn't told Lily exactly why, because he wasn't fully sure he believed it himself. He kept glancing at the door every time a car passed on the road outside, half expecting nothing, half expecting everything. Around noon, a small line of vehicles pulled into the lot, Walter Whitfield's car, and behind it, 2 others, dark and official-looking, the kind of cars that usually meant lawyers, or accountants, or both. Walter walked in first, followed by 2 men in suits, one of them carrying a thick folder under his arm like it weighed more than it looked. "Mr. Coleman," Walter said, "I'd like you to meet my associates, but first, let's talk business." Daniel wiped his hands on his rag out of habit, though there was nothing on them that needed wiping. "I'm listening." "I run a logistics company." "Well, I built it. My daughter runs the day-to-day now, most of it. We've got 211 trucks on the road across 3 states, and every one of them needs regular maintenance, inspections, brake work, the whole picture. Right now, that work goes to a large chain shop downtown. They charge us a fortune, and frankly the quality has been slipping for years. I've seen the numbers, I've seen the complaints, and yesterday I saw the kind of work you do, in a shop with your daughter's name on the sign, run by a man who could have overcharged my daughter and didn't, who could have cut corners and didn't, and who still got treated like his work meant nothing." He nodded toward the man with the folder, who stepped forward and set it on the counter. "I want to move our fleet maintenance contract to you," Walter continued, "starting next quarter. It's a 5-year agreement, renewable, and my people have already run the numbers. $19 million over the life of the contract, assuming you can build out the staff and space to handle it, which, if you're half the businessman I think you are, you will." For a long moment, Daniel couldn't say anything at all. The number didn't feel real. It felt like something from a different life, a different person's story, not something that belonged in a small shop, with a faded sign, and a space heater that rattled every time it kicked on. "That's not a favor," Daniel finally managed. Sir, that's an enormous amount of trust to put in one shop." "It's not a favor," Walter agreed. "It's a correction. My daughter treated your work like it didn't matter. I built this entire company on the belief that work always matters, especially the kind nobody bothers to thank you for. I won't apologize on her behalf. That's hers to do, if she has the sense I raised her to have. But I can put my resources behind the kind of business that deserves them, and I intend to." Outside, through the open bay door, Lily was riding her bicycle in slow, wobbly circles around the empty lot next door, completely unaware that the ground beneath her father's feet had just shifted in a way that would change both their lives. Daniel looked at her for a long moment before he answered. "I'll take the contract," he said. "I don't know what else to say except thank you, and that I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Walter said. "That's precisely why I'm here." The next few weeks were a blur unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. There were papers to sign, a business loan to arrange for the new equipment and space he'd need, staff to hire, a second bay to build, and an entire system to learn for managing fleet maintenance at a scale he'd never imagined handling. It was overwhelming in the way that good things can sometimes be overwhelming, not because they're bad, but because your whole life has to stretch and reshape itself around them, and stretching, even in a good direction, is still uncomfortable. He hired 2 mechanics in the first month, both local, both good with their hands and hungry for steady work. He hired a young woman named Priya to handle scheduling and paperwork, freeing him up to focus on the actual repairs. He kept the original shop exactly as it was, with the same faded sign out front, because he refused to change the name, even as everything else around it grew. Lily still did her homework in the office most afternoons, though now she had an actual desk instead of a stack of cushions, a small desk Daniel had bought the very first week, because some things about their old life were worth keeping and some things deserved to finally be upgraded. "Are we rich now?" Lily asked one evening, not long after everything had started to settle into a new normal. Daniel thought about that question longer than she probably expected him to. "We're not rich the way people mean when they say that word," he told her. "But we're not scared anymore. That's different. That's better, actually." She seemed to accept that answer, the way children often accept things that adults are still working out for themselves. Claire came to the garage 3 days after her father's second visit, on her own, without an appointment, without her sunglasses, driving a car she'd chosen to drive herself for once, instead of letting Franklin take the wheel. Daniel was outside when she pulled up, going over paperwork with one of his new hires, and he felt a small flicker of that old tension return when he recognized the car. But there was something different about the way she got out this time. Slower, less certain, more like someone approaching a conversation she wasn't fully prepared for. "I heard what my father did," she said, standing a few feet away, arms crossed loosely, not in defense this time, but almost like she was holding herself together. "He didn't have to," Daniel said, "but I'm grateful he did. I should have paid you the first time. It was never about the money. I don't even know why I did it." She paused, looking down at the ground before making herself look back up. "I think I wanted someone to argue with, and you didn't, and somehow that made it worse." Daniel didn't say anything right away. He'd learned, over years of dealing with all kinds of customers, that sometimes the best thing you could do was let a person finish saying what they needed to say. "I brought this," Claire continued, holding out an envelope. Inside was a check, far more than the original bill, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper with a short, handwritten note. "I was wrong, and it wasn't about the money. I'm sorry it took my father to remind me what actually matters." Daniel took the envelope but didn't open it fully, not right there in front of her. Some things, he'd learned, were better read alone, later, in the quiet of a closed shop when there was nobody left to perform politeness for. $19 million, he said instead, shaking his head slightly, still not quite used to the number, even after weeks of hearing it. All because of 199. "My father's never believed in small corrections," Claire said, and for the first time, something like a real smile crossed her face. He believes in fixing the whole account, not just the part that's easiest to fix. Behind them, out in the lot, Lily was riding her bike again, faster now, laughing, arms stretched wide, completely unaware of how much her small, simple life had just been quietly secured. The mortgage that no longer kept her father awake at night. The new shoes bought without a second thought before the start of the school year. A future that had, almost overnight, become steady in a way it had never been before. Daniel watched her go around once more before he answered. "Tell your father thank you," he said, "and tell him the brakes are still working perfectly. Best work I've ever done, if I say so myself." Claire laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind she hadn't allowed herself in longer than she wanted to admit, and for once, it didn't cost her a thing to let it show. In the months that followed, Webb and daughter Otto grew into something Daniel could barely recognize from where he'd started. The fleet contract brought steady, reliable income, the kind that let him plan more than 1 week ahead for the first time in years. He expanded the shop, added a proper waiting area with actual chairs instead of a single wobbly bench, and eventually hired a third mechanic, then a fourth, as the workload grew alongside the trust Walter Whitfield had placed in him. He never forgot where he started, though. He kept the original sign, faded letters and all, refusing every suggestion to replace it with something sleeker or more professional. To Daniel, that sign wasn't just advertising. It was a promise. A reminder of the Sunday afternoon he'd spent painting it with a 4-year-old handing him brushes, of every hard year that had come before the good ones, of the fact that good, honest work eventually finds the people who are willing to recognize it, even if it sometimes takes longer than it should. Claire visited the shop more often than either of them probably expected, at first to check on how the contract was going, and later, simply because she found herself comfortable there in a way she rarely felt anywhere else. A place where nobody cared whose daughter she was, where the only thing that mattered was whether the work got done right. She and Daniel became something like friends, in the easy, unforced way people sometimes do when the worst version of a first meeting eventually gives way to something far more honest. Walter Whitfield, for his part, never spoke much about what he'd done. When people asked him about it, and word did travel, the way these stories always do, he would simply shrug and say that he'd only ever done what someone had once done for him, decades earlier, when he was a young man with one truck and no cushion to fall back on if things went wrong. "Somebody believed in me before I'd proven anything," he told a reporter once, when a local paper picked up a small version of the story. "All I did was pass that along." Lily, for her part, grew up hearing the story told and retold at family dinners, at school events, at the kind of gatherings where people liked to remind each other how far they'd come. She never fully understood, as a child, just how close things had come to being very different, how thin the line had once been between a father who could barely keep the lights on and a father who could finally breathe. But she carried the lesson anyway, in the way children absorb the things that matter most without always knowing they're absorbing them, that hard work deserves respect, that kindness has a way of finding its way back around, and that sometimes the smallest, most ordinary moments, a brake job, an unpaid bill, an old man walking into a garage he had no reason to walk into, turn out to be the moments that change everything. Years later, when Lily was old enough to help out at the shop herself on weekends, sweeping floors and handing her father tools the way she once handed him paintbrushes, she asked him one afternoon if he ever thought about that day the woman in the sunglasses had refused to pay. Daniel thought about it for a moment, wiping his hands on a rag that was, by then, considerably newer than the one he used to own. "Every single day," he told her, "it's the reason we're standing here." And in a quiet way, without either of them saying so out loud, they both understood that the real story was never about the money at all, not the $199 that had almost been lost, and not even the $19 million that had eventually come. It was about a man who kept doing honest work even when nobody was watching, and about a family who finally, after a long and difficult road, learned to see him.